Welcome. My name is Nada Milkovich, and I'm welcoming you all to my journey, sharing successes of entrepreneurs and great thinkers. This is a series that we started over the last year as a co-production. We are here to continue our commitment to fostering the entrepreneurial spirit and cross-cultural education. Today, we're kicking off the new year with our first event featuring UC Berkeley Associate Professor of Economics, Dr. Supreet Kaur. And this is again a co-production with the Sikh Foundation and UCSC's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurial Development. I'm the project manager for SEED, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our host for today's event, Jaspreet Kaur.
Um, Thank you for the introduction, Nada. Today we are joined by Dr. Supreet Kaur, an associate professor of economics at UC Berkeley. As a development economist, she focuses on labor markets in developing countries, and she also applies insights from psychology to understand why it is so difficult for people to escape poverty. Welcome, Dr. Kaur, and thank you for your time. I wanted to jump straight ahead into our little Q&A portion. My first question to you would be, what drew you to study and research economics? And was there a specific moment or event that led you to your career path?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here as part of the
Mm.
series. I'm thrilled to be here. Uh, yeah, I don't know that there was a particular moment. I think you know, as a lot of us grew up seeing a lot of poverty around me. That was both true on like visits to India to go, visit family. I mean, I was born in India, but I grew up here in the US. And when of course, you see a lot of poverty and you're struck by it, especially when you go from the US and you go back to India. And I also, saw it just growing up around me because we weren't very affluent when we were growing up. And so that was always there in the back of my mind. But really, I think, when I got to college, I was like, okay, I'm going to be pre-med. I was a computer science major who was also pre-med. I was like, the Desi parents' dream, that's kind of
Yeah.
like on both accounts. But I think, looking around like any sort of idealistic college student, I really felt that I wanted to have an impact. And I thought that the model for that would always be I'm going to have my job, which is like my 9 to 5 job. And then on weekends or, so on, I will like volunteer or I'll like do things to give back to the community or, like support the causes that I care about. And that was really what I thought I would do. And then the summer after my freshman year of college, I did an internship where I just like, coded in Java for like the summer at an investment bank. And I think it just made me realize that I didn't want to work in corporate America. It just wasn't the right thing for me. I wanted to feel like my day to day was impactful. Like, because during that summer, I did do that. I was working at this, investment bank, making more money than I'd ever made before. And on the weekends, I was like doing SAT tutoring at Richmond Hill Gurdwara and like, in Queens, in New York. But and which was great, but it was kind of like I felt like I wanted my 9 to 5 to be different. And so I ended up, thinking then more seriously about what kind of a professional career I could have where I felt like I was making an impact through that career. And I was interested in a lot of things. I was interested in human rights violations. I was interested in gender, studies. I was interested in political science. I was interested in a lot of things. And I think I ultimately decided I was most interested in poverty. And also I think part of it was just my interest. Part of it was also my strengths. So, I thought about, well, maybe I want to be a lawyer because if you're a lawyer, you can do a lot of good in the world as well. You can work on human rights, you can work on, gender issues or so on. But I think ultimately for me, I felt like I like math. Like I was like, I'm good at math. I like math. I enjoy doing math more than I enjoy writing. And so it was this combination of like interests and strengths that led me to be like, okay, well, to study poverty, economics is probably the best discipline, and it allows me to study this thing that I do think is important and I care about, and that led me to decide to study poverty.
Okay. Thank you for that. Honestly, as a recent graduate, I'm still searching for what I want to do. So it's
Yeah.
nice to be able to hear another perspective of someone who's also in like economics because I did also graduate from business management economics. So thank
Hmm.
you.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
that's cool.
my next question would be throughout your career, what challenges have you faced and how did you overcome them? And kind of going along with that, what advice would you give to current students who might be struggling with similar issues?
Yeah. So, I think, in any journey, there's always challenges. I think that, you can't do anything without it being hard. Like anything that's worth doing is going to be a little bit hard. Like it kind of needs to be, or
Yeah.
else, everybody would be doing it. I think for me, like, there were lots and lots of challenges in many steps. I think the first one sort of for me academically arose, um, when I was growing up, because we weren't very affluent, a lot of kind of success came from being very self-driven, right? And kind of saying, well, I don't have the benefit of, we can't afford to go to an SAT tutoring program, so I'll just like, do it at home or so on. But that was fine. I think the biggest challenge, or when I realized I was really out of my depth, is I think when I arrived to college, I just didn't have not only the background, but even more fundamentally, I just didn't have like the study skills or the temperament. Like I was just kind of, I was with all these people who had understood like how do you study and do well on an exam, and I just never had to do that. So like, my first semester, I like bombed a bunch of my classes and got C's because I just didn't know how to not study. Like I was like, okay, I have a midterm, I would just study the night before because I just didn't have this like discipline and the skill set to kind of navigate kind of just the softer parts of how you go through college or navigate success more generally. And I think for me, a big part of my growth was to figure that out, how to become somebody who like plans and like does things in advance and like, has a good work ethic and has a discipline around those things. And I think building that up then enabled a lot of other things in my path. But then, having had that kind of slower start, I had to play catch up for a while. So I, decided in college that I wanted to work on poverty. And I thought, well, maybe I want to do it through academia. Maybe I want to be a professor, which would require going and getting a PhD. Or maybe I want to, maybe I want to go work in the world. Like maybe I want to go work at the World Bank or the UN or like something like this. And so I needed to go to grad school regardless for any of these things, and also as a way to help me figure that out. But when I was, getting out of undergrad, like I wouldn't have gotten into any decent PhD program because I just didn't have like the background in terms of my initial grades were bad. By the end, they were great because I'd learned these skills and I was doing great. So then what I ended up doing was finding kind of a path where I had to just do many stepping stones, where somebody else might have just been able to go straight. I had to go do a master's first and like kind of build that resume and build my foundation and get those early grades to be less important because I showed I could do well in a master's. I had to sort of, overcome a bunch of these kinds of things that come from being initially, disadvantaged. But in my mind, a lot of that was really a matter of patience and hard work more than something that was really a barrier. I feel that, I've been lucky in my life, both, and maybe largely because of just amazing support from my family and my spouse, to be in a situation where even when challenges do arise, often just overcoming them is a matter of just really hard work and dedication, and having kind of the family and social support to be able to do that, then it's always just a matter of time. So doing that, I was able to go get my PhD, to go get my first job, and so on. So what advice would I give to others? Um, I think one thing I would say is that a lot of people in our community come from such disadvantaged backgrounds. It can feel like, college is not something for me, or it can feel like, pursuing this high-flying career is not for me. And I think what I would say is you shouldn't have that mentality. One of the amazing things I think about being in the US, or one of the things that makes us incredibly lucky, is that we live in a place where it doesn't really matter where you come from, you can achieve success. There's really no ceiling for any of us. And it's really a matter of hard work and dedication. And I would hope that people kind of have that in their minds, that they feel that, anything that I put my mind to, I can achieve it. And you have to be realistic. You have to go seek out the advice. So for me, a part of this process was, I decided I wanted to do a PhD. I didn't just apply. I talked to enough people to realize I'm not a strong candidate right now. I talked to enough people to realize what is it that I need to do to get into like the top PhD program in the country or so on. And then I did those things. Like I got the information. I mapped out a plan, and then I just pursued it very doggedly. And I think that approach can let any of us accomplish anything that we really set our minds to. And I would encourage others to do the same. The one other piece of advice I would give, especially to young women who might watch this, is that one disadvantage I didn't have to struggle with very, like, fortunately, was I think I've been very lucky to not have to deal with a lot of the gender norms that make it harder for women in our community to succeed. I was lucky to have a family that was incredibly supportive, and there was no question that my career ambitions and my development was just as important as that of my brothers. My husband is like wonderfully supportive, and there's no question that we're completely equal partners, whether it's in what city do we move to because whose career is important, or who spends time raising kids and spending time with them. And I think as a woman, not accepting anything less than that is important, because that is also essential to enable your own success in other parts of your life.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think a lot of like current college students can relate to your sort of beginning of your academic journey as well, especially the first generation students like us. And I wanted to ask about your like the mindset that you were mentioning at the sort of the end of your answer. And do you think that works in other places such as India in the world where like you really don't really have that supportive family sometimes or that background?
Yeah, I think it's a real problem. I think it's a huge issue in our community. And it's not only in India. I think it's a huge issue in our community in the US. I think a lot of,
Yeah.
a lot of girls, I think it's a really an embarrassment for our community. There's a lot of
Mm.
girls in this community who grew up without, not facing the same opportunities or support that their brothers might. And I think that, my advice would be that while it might feel that way, and it's very easy to internalize those norms and let them define how you view yourself and your own importance and maybe your own self-worth, it is absolutely not true. And as a Sikh, I think Sikhi itself teaches us that that is absolutely not true. And I personally draw a lot of inspiration from Sikhi and from the gender equality that is enshrined in the philosophy of our religion, even if it is not practiced day to day and culturally in Punjab or in Punjabi households. And so I think drawing inspiration from that, I hope, it lends me strength. And I do think that it is that once you're an adult and you're kind of on your own and you have your job and you have your financial independence, you can then step away from that and see, actually, I do have the ability to determine my destiny. I have the ability to choose a spouse who has the values that I want them to have in terms of the way they treat me, the way they perceive me. But when you're growing up or when you're young, it's hard to break out of that and realize that. And so I think thinking that, if you're in a situation where you feel like you are not supported, realizing that if you just work hard, one thing our community is great at is, we do expect everybody to do well in school. We want people to go to school. We want them to do well. So, work hard, work towards your goal. And once you are independent, then you have the ability to be a little bit more of the master of your destiny. And you will get there. And so right now, think about that future for yourself and think about what you want that future to look like, and work towards it.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to also, you kind of got into this already, but as your background as a Sikh, how has your, faith influenced how you choose your research areas? And yeah, can you just provide some more examples around
Yeah,
that?
I think my faith is both a source of strength for me. I think it empowers me to be ambitious, to feel like I am a strong person, because I think that Sikhi is, we have this concept of miri piri, we have this concept of the sensipai. We are both, you know, instructed to be incredibly spiritual, but also very much in the world where we achieve things and we are ambitious, and and we are strong and we overcome adversity. I think that's very much in our psyche, and I really draw on that in my, or I believe that heritage gives me a lot of strength and empowers me. In terms of how it affects what I choose to work on, I think it very much has, even when I was in college, it very much influenced this desire to do something with my career that helped other people. Like I felt like almost there's working towards Sarbat Palla is like an important part of what Sikhi is about. We say it in Ardas, every time we do Ardas.
Mm.
And so for me, that means in my research, I'm not only just working with the Sikh community, I'm working in Africa, I'm working in other parts of India. For me, just working on poverty and making a dent on the problem of poverty is something that is important, and it's very much inspired by this notion that we should be doing seva in all walks of our life, and we should care about the Sarbat Allah, which is all of humanity's welfare. And so that very much influences kind of how I think about whether something is worthwhile and where my time should be going.
Thank you. And I wanted to move on to kind of your research now and your um, background as like an economist, sorry. And I wanted to ask, how's your work influenced any real world policies, and are you able to share any examples of that?
Yeah, so I'll talk about something I'm working on right now. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about working on is helping people save. And why is that something I work on? So if if you go to Americans and you ask Americans, could you come up with $400 in an emergency? About 40% of Americans couldn't do that. Like they couldn't come up within a week for, $400 in emergencies. Like it would be very difficult for them to do in the sense that they don't have that much savings. So 40% of Americans don't even have about like a week's worth of wages in savings. In India, where I've done work, if this when I did this was like in Orissa. I asked people, workers, could you come up with 1,000 rupees for a medical emergency in 2 days if you needed to? And there again, like over half of people like don't have that much money saved up. And that's a big problem because if you don't have even a basic buffer, then when something goes wrong, your car breaks down, you lose your job, you then can't bear those shocks. That's what leads to things like evictions. It leads to people not being able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. How do we think people climb out of poverty? It's kind of like, save a little bit at a time, you improve your situation. And the fact that a lot of people are having trouble doing that, I think is an important policy problem of our time. And my work focuses on using ideas from psychology to help people with problems like this, to think about how can we design better policy solutions that help people solve their savings problem or solve, other problems that they're facing in their lives. Because it's not that people don't want to save more. It's hard. There's so many demands on your money, and people end up kind of living paycheck to paycheck. And so I worked on this problem initially within the context of Zambia. So Zambia is a country in Eastern Africa. And there, just like in many other parts of Africa, what happens is farmers harvest their crops and then they, get this one big harvest, which is like 90% of their income for the year. And then they have to like eat that harvest over the course of the year. So they eat that for food, they sell it, and they use it for the money they're going to need for the course of the year. And what happens is people run out of money and food like a few months before the next harvest. And that period in between is called the hungry season, where people don't have enough to eat, children are skipping meals. If you look at child BMI, it looks like a yo-yo. It drops during the hungry season, then it goes back up when harvest finally happens and people have food again. And so this is a little bit of a problem of failure of savings because people have a bunch right after harvest. They're consuming a lot, they're spending on things, but then they deplete it down and they run out a little too soon. And so what I did was, I went to Zambia and I worked, I sort of, after doing a bunch of field work and talking to people and trying to understand like what's going on, I realized that some of this behavior, it looks a lot like something called the planning fallacy, and which is something that psychologists have studied for a long time, which all of us encounter in different ways. So a lot of us might encounter this in like with time budget. So for example, every day I make a to-do list on what fraction of days have I ever actually gotten through my to-do list for the day, like basically zero. Or a lot of students, like you might say, okay, I have like, a assignment due and I'm going to like do it in advance, but then like you're always kind of running out of time. We're always like over ambitious, over optimistic. And what this literature in psychology gives us is like a way to solve this problem, like a set of interventions that help people be more realistic about their budgets, in this case, the time budget, and like how long it's going to take to do things and kind of plan better. And, whether it's your studying or your time management or so on. And so we did is we took those insights and we created a new intervention that was for savings that used those insights. And we did this really simple 45-minute intervention with households. We evaluated it with a randomized trial. So like half of the households got it and half of them didn't. So we did it with like 800 households initially. And by doing this, we like increased savings by 15%. And so, we started with a problem. We took some ideas from the academic literature on should we think about this problem? We then designed something in the world to try to like tackle that problem. We then did that thing, in Zambia, like I ran a team of people where we like went in and we did this thing. And then we evaluated it for impact. Because I am an economist, so we collect data, we do surveys, we figure out, okay, what's actually going on. And we saw that this was having a huge impact. And because of this one simple thing we did, people entered the hungry season 6 months later with about a month more worth of food. And they were able to invest more in their own farms. And so their yields went up by 9% at the end of the year. So it's like a very successful intervention. And so now we are taking that intervention, we're scaling it up. So now we're working in Malawi, which is close to Zambia, and we're working with a big NGO, and we're kind of, launching country. We just did a pilot there. We're launching countrywide next year. And again, we're evaluated. And if that's successful, this will scale to 9 countries in Africa in the subsequent years. And so that's just an example of how in economics research, the kind of research I do at least proceeds, and how you can use that to then direct policy impact in the world.
Okay, and I wanted to ask, how long did this process take in Zambia?
So this took, I think the initial, I initially went out and spent some time, and I had, with a team, it was me, some of my colleagues, a PhD student. And so I think the process of developing this probably took about, 6 months, and then we kind of launched the next year, and then we ran it for a year, and then we evaluated. So the whole thing took about two to 3 years.
Okay, nice to hear. And I mentioned at the beginning of your introduction that you also apply insights from psychology to understand why it's so difficult for people to escape poverty. So could you give some, tips on how you have done that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from talking to other people. So I'm in an economics department, but there's a lot of amazing psychologists at Berkeley. So I've started an initiative at Berkeley where we kind of get economists and psychologists together to do lab meetings together, to do conferences together, to learn from each other. And by doing that, I've been able to see that, oh, there's these like great insights that psychologists have. And if I port them into how economists think about the world, we can do a better job at understanding human behavior. We can do a better job at explaining why people do what they do. And so this example in Zambia was one of those. So I had never heard of the planning fallacy before, but I went to Zambia. I was like, look, people, this is weird. People believe these things. They're doing these things. It doesn't really line up with the way economists think people should behave, like economic theories of behavior. And I talked to my psychology friends, and they're like, but this sounds a lot like the planning fallacy. And we know this is like, we've studied this for a long time. And I went and looked at it, and I was like, oh, this does look like the planning fallacy. That's great, because now there's all these smart people over here in psychology who have like studied this thing, and they thought about how you combat it. And I can like take that thing and I can like repurpose it and design something for this different problem, and so kind of this give and take, this like source of this collaboration and kind of learning from others plays a big role in this kind of work.
And moving on to, your background as a professor at UC Berkeley, um, what are kind of the most exciting or challenging trends in economics that students currently should be aware of, study?
I think that economics, unfortunately, I feel like the way economics is taught in undergrad is like super boring. It's, supply and demand graph
Yeah.
or IFLM graphs. It's like super dry. And so in fact, I was not an economics major. I had no intention of being an economics major. It was just so dry and boring. And I think that the economics I do is a lot more than what I just described, where you're just like actually looking at social policy problems and like thinking about how to combat them. And so what I think that people should, the way people I think should view economics is like this very broad umbrella that is really more than anything a set of tools to look at social science problems or social policy problems. And so you have economists who are doing things like I do, where we just go to villages in developing countries and like do stuff. There's people who study environment. There's people who study poverty in the US. There's people who study, okay, how should we design taxes so that they, are progressive, but then don't cause distortions. There's people who study the macroeconomy, which the Federal Reserve would do. So economics is incredibly diverse as a discipline. And you can do a lot with those basic tools that are common across economics. And so I think that when you start taking econ classes, they do feel dry, but what they build up to, I think, is quite exciting, because for better or for worse, I think economists have outsized influence in the policy space. So whether you go to Washington, D.C. and the federal government and you think about who is designing the policies that the government is going to enact, to going to the World Bank or IMF, like you go to any of these places, economists play an outsized role in the world in designing policies. And I think and I think studying economics gives you a bunch of tools to like think about policy design. And I think it's quite exciting in economics that we are not limited to studying just the economy. We can kind of people study crime, people study discrimination, people study, anything you can think of, people study with these tools. And I think that that is what makes economics exciting. And I think it's increasingly so that kind of a field where you really think about a problem and think about how to tackle it using this rich set of tools, which are both analytical and empirical, because now you also know how to work with data. You know how to figure out, is the thing I'm talking about real in the data? I'm not just hypothesizing it. I can go and check in the data. Is this like right? Or if I go try something in the world, I can figure out, did it actually work? And I think economics provides amazing tools to be able to do that. And I think that's what makes it an exciting discipline.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Some of the intro courses I took for econ at the beginning of my academic journey, they were pretty boring, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But I do think that you are right in that they build like a good foundation for you to be able to apply those things into actual real world problems.
Yeah.
And as a professor, what do you tell your students are like the most important skills or knowledge that they should be developing now during their college years?
So I think that, it really depends on what you want to do. If you want to do economics, there's going to be a set of things you should do. So, for example, math skills are super, super, super important. It's like way more helpful to have taken a bunch of math classes than to have taken econ classes as an undergrad if you want to do an economics PhD, which, very few people admittedly want to do as they should. Like, I don't think that
Yeah.
is something that is for everybody. But I think that, but more broadly, I think I feel like I encounter a lot of people who kind of have some aspiration, but they're kind of disconnected in what they're doing now with what that aspiration is. And so I'll take my discipline as an example. There are people like, oh, I would love to be a professor of economics. And yet they've never talked to anybody about what should I do in college to prepare myself for that. Or they're like, I really want to go to med school. And so I'll take these things and whatever. But like they haven't maybe necessarily gone and talked to somebody who's gotten into an amazing med school, or talked to, somebody in their ecosystem who can really advise them. If you want to get into an amazing med school, what is it that you need to start doing from freshman year onwards? And kind of saying that, I might only be a freshman, I have 4 years, but rather than waiting until senior year to be like, okay, what is it that I need to do to like get to my next step? Realizing that a lot of that needs to start early, I think is really important. And that I think applies at every phase of your career. So if you've graduated from college, it is hard to figure out what you want to do, but if you kind of, force yourself to say, what is my goal? What do I want 3 years from now? What is my ideal dream thing that I want to be doing 3 or 5 years from now? And then saying, okay, well, that's my goal. How do I work backwards from there? I think is like super important. And I don't know that enough people do that. So I think that would be one important thing. The other thing I would say, and this is obvious, but I think is worth saying, is that you have to work really hard. I mean, it's, whatever it is that you want to be doing, even if you're a freshman or a sophomore and you have no idea what you want to do with your future, the one thing that is true is whatever that future thing is, it will be more likely to happen if you have good grades. So if you have a higher GPA, you're more likely to get that management consulting job at McKinsey, or get into law school, or get into whatever thing you want to do, is just going to be more likely if you have better grades. And so don't lose sight of that. Senior year is too late to start. And so one does need to like think about that earlier.
Yeah. And kind of going in hand with that previous question, how do you think students can make the most out of their college experiences academically and personally? Are there any opportunities that you recommend that they would seek out?
Yeah. So there's the thing I said, obviously, about, the importance of hard work. I think I'd say two other things. One is it is, I think it's really easy to sort of look at what everybody else is doing and get a little bit caught up in that and think about, okay, and have that
Mm,
influence you. And I mean that both in terms of what their career aspirations might be. It also means socially. I think I grew up, or I was in college at a time where social media and all of these things weren't there, but even then it was very easy to be influenced by others. And I think what you want is, you obviously don't want to be closed off to others. You want to be open-minded. You want to be inspired by those around you. But ultimately, you don't want to be driven or influenced by those around you. And I think that's even harder to escape now, where everybody's living like their best Instagram life, and
yeah.
you look at that and you think, well, that's, my life doesn't look like that, and I should be doing all these things, or I should be broadcasting my best life on Instagram. And I think that that takes up a ton of time, and ultimately in 4 years that like doesn't help you. And so I think like having the discipline to say, I'm going to keep my head down, I'm going to kind of focus on what I need to do to achieve my goals is like super important. It's super hard, but it's super important. I think the other two things that I would say is Sangat really matters, like who you surround yourself with really matters. And I don't mean that in terms of Sikhs. Like I think I have just as many non-Sikh friends, Sikh friends. I have more non-Sikh friends than Sikh friends. And but still, whether it's, whatever the group of people is that you hang out with, it's really important who you surround yourself with. And it's important to have that support network. I don't think, and none of us can get through life alone. And so thinking about, who is that sangat that you want to cultivate, thinking about who are the people who are going to have my back. And one of the things you learn is as you grow older, your closest friends end up being people you met in earlier parts of your life. Those are the people you spent aimless amounts of time with. And so thinking about, is this a person who's, cool and popular? Is this a person whose values are ones that I really want, who I want, on with me on my wedding day, the person who's going to like be the masi or the bua or the chacha or the taya to my kids, like all of those things are important. And I think choosing your friends well is important when you're younger, because those friends are going to be with you for a long time. And it's a huge thing in your life to have that support network. Um, and then the final thing I would say is, for me, when I grew up in a household where we were religious in the sense that, we did Ras and Saib in the evenings and so on, but I didn't have an intellectual relationship with Sikhi. I was just kind of told, like, why do we do this? Because you're supposed to, right? And that was kind of, there wasn't a sense of like, why do we do things? And so in fact, I didn't wear the sar when I was growing up. And when I got to college is when I first, I think, intellectually engaged with Sikhi for the first time by going to retreats, and, there's retreats and camps and so on. And what they got me to do for the first time is really engage and understand, okay, well, I read, there's shabads. What do they mean? Like, what are they telling me? What is philosophy? What is the history? And I think really getting a sense of that helped me appreciate the religion and my identity in a way that I had it before. It gave me kind of a different level of connectivity with it. And when I was in college, I also was lucky that I didn't just, explore Sikhi. Through my coursework, got to, I read the Bible and the Torah and the Quran, and I in general explored, you know, faith and religion and spirituality. And those things, I think, had a profound impact on me. And when you're young, when you're in high school, college, 20s, you're at this point when you can be profoundly impacted. You're still trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to figure out your values. You're trying to figure out your beliefs. And so I think that level of intellectual engagement that lets you say, like, why is it that people do this, kind of makes, I think, plays a big role, or did for me. And then deciding, is this who I am? Is this thing I want to embrace and have it be an important part of me? And we're lucky that there are tons and tons of camps and retreats and books and, forums or the Sikh Student Association, like all of these ways to like connect with others, to learn. And I would really encourage people to do that, because that shaped who I was and defined me and made my life a lot more meaningful and better. And everyone should find that for themselves, whether, in kind of whatever way or shape or form that might take.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really great answer to hear. Especially someone like I did grow up with the social media aspect of everything, and it definitely did like lead me to compare myself to others. And even I know in some Punjabi cultures, like your parents will compare you to other
Yeah,
kids and like
for sure.
yeah, tell you yeah. So it definitely did take a lot of discipline for me as well to be able to break out of that cycle of comparison and just going into, focusing more on myself. And I definitely do believe that the people you surround yourself with as well are like the backbone of who you are. Especially through college, like you go through so many different friend groups just to find, your people. And I can definitely say that I have as well. So I do agree with a lot of your approaches to the college experience. Um, and now I kind of, sorry, wanted to go back to a little bit about your research and um, I think the psychological aspect of your research is very interesting to hear. I wanted to ask, like, how do the lifelong psychological factors shape a person's ability to break out of poverty? Because I know that is very hard to do once you're in that cycle.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think that the starting point for that is just, you know, the starting point for that, I think, is just but when we think of poverty, the way we even define what it means to be poor is based on how much money you have, right? Like by definition, the poverty line is defined at a place where you don't have enough money to meet your basic needs, and anyone below that line is like poor. So we think about the problem of poverty traditionally as not having enough money. And I think that kind of does affect how we view anti-poverty policy. So a lot of anti-poverty policy is then giving people money because being poor is not having enough of it. And so we have, food stamps, and we have, unemployment assistance, and, so on. And but I think that but being poor is like much more than that. Um, you know, Poverty also means you don't have stable housing. It means you might not have clean water. It means you live in a place where there's a lot of crime. It might mean you live in a place where like there's not good schools. It means that you live in a place where like you don't have access to like savings or credit or like a bank if you're like in a developing country. It means that you have a lot of volatility because you don't have insurance and you're hit with all these shocks, and also your income is really volatile. So like, people who are more affluent just get a paycheck deposited into their bank account every 2 weeks or every month. Lower income people have huge amounts of volatility. They don't know what their shift schedule is going to be like a week in advance, or employers like 20% of the time will cancel a shift to within like a month. Like 20% of, low income workers that had like a shift just unexpectedly canceled in the course of a month. There's all of these things that are aspects of poverty that go well beyond just not having a lot of money in absolute terms. And all of those other things have psychological consequences. Volatility creates anxiety above and beyond just not having a lot of money, because it's hard to line up like all of these shocks with all of the uncertainty in income. And that has its own psychology behind it. Poor people are way more likely to be depressed than rich people. So I think that if you turn to crime, like if you're a kid growing up in an inner city school, you might be like running home from school as soon as school ends because you want to avoid getting jumped. And that's like an important consideration that's top of mind, which outweighs things like, am I going to participate in this activity, or am I going to do this thing? And that has psychological consequences, and it takes up brain space. So I think that a lot of the other aspects of poverty have psychological consequences, and those consequences make it harder for people to climb out of poverty. So I've actually done work that shows, if you give, this was in India, like if you give workers, who are really short on cash, like some money in their pocket while they're coming to work, they become more productive. So that, which makes it easier for them to then earn more money, which like kind of shows the cycle. There's work by some of my colleagues here at Berkeley, who have shown that like even, low income parents in the US, when money is tight, they're less likely to like engage with their toddlers and talk to them. Like their parenting style changes, which then affects kind of the success of, right, the next generation. So I think this idea of like, why is it so hard to climb out of poverty? I think that there's not like one specific psychology. I think there's like lots of things, from depression to anxiety to cognitive load and so on. But I think all of these things add up to making it harder to climb out of poverty. And so in my sort of work, and my view is, we then need to think about these other features, these other psychologies, and use that to design smarter policies. And like the thing I did in Zambia is an example of that. Like we didn't just go give people money. We said, what is it that's making it hard to not save? This planning fallacy thing. Let me like design something that targets that thing. And now I can make an impact in a much more cost-effective way on people.
Yeah, I think your work is very inspiring, especially all you did in Zambia, and I hope that you're successful in adapting it to other countries and on a larger scale.
Thank you.
Um, yeah. I wanted to ask, um, have you faced any challenges like as a Sikh woman, especially in higher education, and how you dealt with them, and kind of what you would say to young Sikh women considering a similar path as you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that um, as I said, like I feel like I have been incredibly blessed because I have had so much support. So I actually ended up getting, so I met my now husband when I was in college, and
Mhm.
got married pretty young, like way younger than I would have felt, like younger than my mom got married. Like my mom got married, like later than I did, which is like super unusual. But we were in love and we decided to get married. And but I think one of the things that among all his other wonderful qualities, I mean, I think the thing is, as I said, like I think I was lucky, and it was very clear from the beginning to me, and we had a lot of conversations. And I think this is one piece of advice I would really give, like my partner and I had a lot of conversations before we got engaged about like what do things look like? Hey, if you want to live in California, so sure, we'll move from New York to California. But if I get into graduate school in Boston and I really want to go, we're going to move. And we kind of, what do you think about that? And, is that okay? Like we talked about what is our philosophy for raising kids? How do we think about how important your career is and my career is? How do we think about if there's conflict with your parents, how are we going to deal with that? Like having those conversations and really understanding if you're on the same page is like so important because so many people don't have those conversations. And then you're kind of like surprised later when then these really important life things come up. So we were very much on the same page. And so just as an example, we did move to California after I finished college. That's where his job was. And then I got into grad school at Harvard, which was across the country in Boston, and we moved. He sort of first asked his job, can I be virtual? And then he kind of quit his job and we moved there. And so that I could do that. And then, there's been times where we've moved for him. There's been times where we've moved for me. But I think having that like deep partnership and support is like so important in kind of pursuing your goals. And the great thing about higher education, which is what you asked about specifically, is that of course you can do that kind of as an independent person because most of us are not married when you're, going through to do higher education.
Yeah.
But I think more generally, having the support network is super important. And if you don't get it, I think just going for it and demanding it for yourself is very important. In terms of have I faced challenges, I think I've been incredibly lucky. I don't think I have faced discrimination that's made it difficult for me to succeed. I think a lot of us might worry, hey, I look different. I'm of this different background. Maybe I'm going to face discrimination. It's going to be hard for me to be successful. And I have had no professional Sikh mentors. Like all of my professional mentors have been, not Sikhs. And my advisors in the PhD program, like the people who've mentored me in other ways, in terms of professionally as an economist. And I've never felt that like wearing a dastar or being a Sikh has held me back from that mentorship and that guidance. And so one thing I would say is, of course, there's a lot of discrimination in the world. Of course, Sikhs face a lot of discrimination in our day-to-day lives. And so I would never say that this is not a concern in general. What I would say, though, is don't let fear of that concern hold you back from being very ambitious in what you want to do. Like Sikhs can be successful in any scope or realm. And it's not that you're going to face so much of a burden from being who you are or practicing your identity or your faith fearlessly that it's going to like hold you back. I haven't found that to be true for me.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear how blessed you were throughout your journey.
Yeah.
And just for this Sikh youth who might feel kind of disconnected to their heritage, what would you say to encourage them to embrace it, especially as they build their professional lives?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that for me, the cultural practice of Sikhi is quite different than what I see as like the essence of Sikhi. I think the amazing thing about Sikhi is that unlike many other religions, for example, we don't have a priestly class. We don't have this thing where you go to a church and there's a priest who interprets your religion for you, right? We have a very personal relationship with spirituality as a Sikh. And so what I would say is I think that's one of the things that makes it beautiful because that means Sikhi can be what you make it for yourself, right? It doesn't have to be like for some people, they go to Gurdwara and they find tons of solace at Gurdwara. And for that, my mom loves going and listening to Kirtan. Other people might say that's culturally different than what I find, soothing. But for other people, like understanding Gurbani or understanding that, like, it is that gives them a sense of like comfort and solace. And so there are different ways to practice Sikhi. But I think that the things that are not that are very important is like having this personal relationship, actually understanding what you're reading, understanding the reason behind it, understanding what it's actually telling you, which when you're starting out, I think requires help. Like we can't just do it on our own. And this is where I think retreats and camps and so on are like super helpful. And they run the gamut. They run the gamut from people who are not even sure they want to be a Sikh to people who are like, I'm a Sikh and I really want to build my spirituality. And you can pick, choose your own adventure. You can like find the thing that is the right fit for you. And I think putting yourself out there and like exploring and being open-minded about, can I find my fit in the world? Can I find the way that this feels good to me? I think is what I would sort of advise people who might not right now feel that strong connection. And in doing so, I hope will find things that empower you, inspire you, make you feel more fulfilled on the inside, because all of us need that. I think all of us struggle mentally and so on. And I think one of the things that Sikhi is very brilliant in recognizing is that it is that mental. That is the thing. If you even think about the concepts that are important in Sikhi, like think about in Japji Sahib, like Manjite Jagjit means if you can conquer your mind, you can conquer the world. It's a recognition that the biggest struggles we have are the ones inside of us. The I feel sad, I feel discouraged, I like can't be, I can't get myself to do this thing. Those are the things that ultimately are the biggest barriers we face in our lives to success, to personal happiness, all these things. Or I have this conflict in my family, I have this drama with my friends, it's making me feel super upset. How are you resilient in the face of that? How do you thrive in the face of all of the things that life is going to throw at you? And I think Sikhi gives a set of tools to manage that. Like if you think about what is the philosophy is Chardi Kala, like no matter what's happening, I feel uplifted. This is not just theoretical. This is like, actually what one is trying to achieve and get to as a mental state, using the tools that Gurbani and so on give us and the teachings give us to achieve that. And I think that that is something that all of us who are on this journey are like, aspiring towards. And lots of people, I think, pay like, tons and tons of money to therapists to do that. And I think that is important. I am not at all saying that when, I think if you have, like, I think people benefit from that enormously. You should definitely do that if that's something that you're able to do or are open to doing. I think we should do more of that in our community. But it's also the case that Sikhi gives us tools to help navigate our mental day-to-day lives, which can make us feel just better. So it's not only about being more religious, it's about being more happy. It's about being more functional as a human being. And I think there's a lot of tools there that can help with that. And so I would say, seek those out, learn what they are, learn what Gurbani's telling you. Just reciting it doesn't really do much. But if you understand, just, do less of it, but actually understand it, that might do a lot more for you. And so go to these camps and retreats to try to like figure that out and learn that.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear. A great piece of advice. I myself kind of struggled with my own background of Sikhi because, again, my mom would just take us to the Gurdwara and we would listen to the Kirtan. But I think, especially throughout my college years, I have been more connected to the religion. And again, like the tools you were talking about, I also, got more in touch with that as side of myself as well. So it's great to hear that other people can as well. Um, and I kind of wanted to move into my last question for you for today. And that would just to tie everything together. If you could go back and give your college self one piece of advice, what would it be, and how can that advice apply to students today?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just reiterate what I said before, which would be, it would really be this, I'll pick a few things from kind of what I've already said. I think it would be, these things of, work super hard. I think don't get discouraged from, things are hard initially, but, I had a mentor say to me once when I was in grad school, something that stuck with me for a long time, which was, most of what you have right now to work with is outside of your control. You're born however smart you are, you have whatever money you have, you have whatever, all of the things you have up until this point that have happened to you, that you've had access to, like they're not in your control. It's done. Like you're here now. The only thing you can control is how hard you work. Like literally, like that is in your control. Like nothing else is in your control. That is in your control. And if that's the only thing in your control, then that's the thing you have to do. And if you do that, you can better, wherever you are. And I think that was like great advice for me. And I think that this thing of like, be ambitious, really think about, what is going to make me feel happy and fulfilled. Don't just go through the motions of life, but be intentional about those things. Like be intentional about what would be my dream thing that I would be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now? How do I work backwards from that? Be intentional about who am I surrounding myself with in terms of my sangat or my friends. There's a lot, there's some beautiful sort of like Western literature that just kind of points out this idea that your mind is this active thing that gets used to thinking in certain ways. And so if you practice thinking positive, if you practice appreciating the beautiful, if you practice optimism and or practice kind of kindness, all of these things then actually influence in how you are in the world in general, because our mind is a creature of habit. And I think that applies to then who we surround ourselves. Are you surrounding yourself with people where you're like, this person behaves in a way that I actually want to be? Not because, not because they're fun for a minute, but is this what I want to be? This is how I see myself. And so I think just this intentionality of all of the different decisions you make in life is like super important. And being intentional in that way can then help you make decisions like, am I getting too caught up in social media, or am I actually like doing what's real? Am I, you know, am I letting my culture and the norms of my culture just push me, or guide me in what I should be doing, or have I made an intentional decision on what it is I want to do, and so on. So I think that's probably what I would say. And I wish I had been a little more intentional in that way when I was younger.
So that will be all for my questions today. Thank you so much. I wanted to open it up to now our attendees for our Q&A portion. We do have one question, but if anyone else has any more, please feel free to drop them again into the Q&A section of this panel. Our first question would be, can you share a bit about any mentors who have significantly influenced your journey in economics or in life in general? And what qualities or advice from them have you carried with you always?
Yeah. So I guess I just gave you one about this
Yeah.
working hard. I think that my family has played an outsized role in me. Like I think, my parents, seeing their incredible work ethic, seeing just the unconditional love and unconditional like sacrifice that they made coming to this country with like no money and struggling so much to kind of give us a better life. That's a story that a lot of us have, whether it's ourselves or our parents went through that, and it's in our legacy. Even my grandparents, my grandmother was like pregnant with my dad when she walked across from Pakistan to India during the partition, and she like, gave birth to him as soon as she crossed the border into India. So just like kind of the strength that we see reflected, and I think in our immediate family, but also like, I think I felt like you saw that spirit during the farmers' protests. Like you just have these like, people who are like 80 years old who are just kind of hanging out on GT Road. It's just it is I think that I draw a lot of inspiration from the strength that we see reflected, I think, in the generations that have come before us. It is a model of, really, do I think this is hard? Like, really, am I complaining about this thing that's happening to me right now? Like, the inner strength and toughness, and just like suck it up and like get through life, that I feel like our previous generations had, I always find as like a huge source of inspiration. And then I've also benefited, I benefited from I have like two older brothers who were like incredible mentors to me, and kind of gave me a lot of support and helped shelter me from those gender norms. Like they were just as insistent as my mom was that like, you need to be something, you need to, like you're not just some like, like kind of rejecting kind of some of these Punjabi gender norms, which was like super, I think, helpful for my development. And then professionally, I have found a lot of wisdom, and I have had great mentors. And I think one of the mentors I have right now, I think always does me the following service. He is always pushing me to be more ambitious than I am. It's like always pushing me to be like, okay, you've thought of this thing, but just take a step back. Is this really enough? Is it good enough? Or should you be dreaming bigger? And I think that is like also has been super, super valuable.
And then another question from our audience is, what's one lesson or value from Sikhi that has guided you through both your personal and professional life?
I think that probably the one of the things that, and maybe because it's just true for me, is I think in lots of times in my life have really struggled with, I wouldn't say that it's, mental illness or depression, nothing that extreme, but just feeling kind of like down, feeling like not, like letting things get to me. Like I feel like if there's like a conflict and with people that I'm close to me, like it really affects me. If like things are not going well, I had a tendency to get down. I like kind of struggled with a lot of this, especially during grad school. And for me, I think the emphasis on Sikhi on mental health, on like this thing I said of Manjite Jagjit, that so much of what we need to conquer is really in our own minds, I think has been incredibly powerful. And like thinking of how do I get tools to manage that better, both from Sikhi and outside of Sikhi. And I think like that actually has been helpful in guiding my ability to just navigate the ups and downs of life. Like I found just that super, super useful. And I think Sikhi has a lot to say about that, but also kind of prompting me to realize that it is mental. Like a lot of what you need to sort out and be, is not like, it's not external. It's really just working on yourself internally. And I think that that's been super useful. And then in terms of, and then the other thing I would sort of say is just this idea of Seva and Sarbat Tapala. Like I feel incredibly fortunate and blessed to have had the life I've had. I live in America where there's all this opportunity. I always have food in my fridge. I have like a roof over my head. I have a family that I love and who loves me. I have all of these things that kind of give me this really strong base. And so I think I've taken so much inspiration from Sikhi to say that, you have a responsibility to then give back. Like, your responsibility is not to say, I had like a great time today and so on. Of course, that's like important. It doesn't mean that your life should be devoid of like doing things for yourself, but I do think that for me, Sikhi's played this humongous role in just pushing me to be like, my life needs to have a bigger purpose. Like my day to day, what I spend my time on, what I do needs to be in the service of something. Like it is my responsibility. It is not just like a thing I'm doing for others. It is my responsibility to give back in some way. And that has played a huge role in how I chose my career, what I choose to work on, what I choose to do day to day, and even the lessons that I now want to impart on my own kids.
Thank you so much for all of your great advice. And it was great learning about, your career path and very inspirational. Those were our only Q&A questions. So once again, huge thank you for taking your time out of your day and being a part of our webinar today. It's
Yeah,
great
thank you
meeting
for
you.
having me.
I also want to thank you so much to our host, Supreet Kaur, and our guest, Dr. Supreet Kaur, UC Berkeley Associate Professor of Economics. It's been a real pleasure hearing you two speak and wonderful work that you're doing, Dr. Kaur. This has been our journey, my journey, sharing the successes of entrepreneurs and great thinkers. We've today continued our commitment to fostering the entrepreneurial spirit and cross-cultural education. This is a quarterly event. Our next one will be with Bill Diamond, CEO of SETI, with our host Lauren Kinsell, Chair of UCSC's Board of Trustees. This is happening November 13th at 7:10 p.m. on the UCSC campus. It will be streamed live. Just to remind everyone, this is a co-production of the Sikh Foundation and UCSC Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurial Development. I'm Nada Milkovich, the project manager for SEED, and a huge thanks to Tanmeet Gurjal as well as Raj Kapani for helping us create this wonderful event today. That's been very illuminating and educational. Thank you all and have a wonderful day and hope to see you at our next event.
Thank you.
Bye.